Hi, quilt peeps. This is Tish from Cotton Candy Quilts in lovely scenic Gaston, Indiana, and I'm here today to talk about how to make a quilt backing out of regular size fabric. Now, if you can, you should always get wide back unless you have a pretty small quilt, because wide back ends up cheaper and it's easier to square up. But sometimes we have that favorite um, fabric that we like on the back, and then we need to make our backs. And I get a lot of questions about how to do this. It's way simpler than it sounds, but there's a couple more steps than you think there is. So the first thing we need to do is figure out how much backing we need. So this is Cotton Candy Quilt Shop's free quilt backing calculator. It's on our website. You can download it free. You can make as many copies as you want. Please leave our logo and information at the top. And you can use this every time. Now there's quilt backing calculators that go on your phone, but if you want to do this the old-fashioned way, this is easy. So first we have to decide how big our quilt is. And I've measured this customer's quilt, and it's 69 by 69. For long arming, I need 5 inches all around to be able to load it onto the long arm. So we're going to add 10 inches to each direction because that's 5 inches on every side. And we end up with a 79 by 79 inch back. Then we need to pick one of the boxes below. And the second box says that the length of the quilt backing required, which is the yellow box, is more than 40 inches but less than 80 inches. You're going to use this line right here. So the width of the quilt backing required, which is the yellow box, is 79 inches. We're going to take that times 2, which is 158 inches. We're going to divide that by 36 because that's a yard of fabric, and it's 4 3/8 yards of fabric. And this number right here, this 2, means that we need 2 strips that are 79 inches long. So down here it's going to tell you what how to figure out parts of a yard, because unless you're working in a fabric store, you usually don't know how that is. So I have cut 2 lengths of fabric 79 inches long to make this quilt back, because 80 inches is fine the other direction. So the first thing we want to do is cut 2 identical strips because we need 2 strips. Now I've done this, and sometimes people wonder, how do I cut 2 identical strips? You can use a pin because 79 inches is longer than your mat. You can measure part way and put a pin in, and then measure again and put a pin in. And then when you measure your second one, you can lay your first one down, lay your second one down across it, and then cut where it says. Now, how do you do that in your house? Well, hallways are good. And then you can just slide your cutting mat right under where you're supposed to cut and cut. So the next step, and this is the one that gets missed all the time, is these need to be exactly the same size with nothing hanging out on the end. To mark the centers of both pieces. So I'm going to put my edges together here. Let's scoot back just a little more here. There we go. I'm going to put my edges together, fold in half, and on one side I am going to put a pin in. So I don't really need both of these sides because I'm only pinning in the center. And then I'm going to do that with both strips. So we'll do that with this strip. Lining up the corners. This is pretty star fabric, isn't it? And then marking the center. And at this point, I am going to line those centers up right sides together, and I'm going to leave on the selvage. Now I know putting pins in a back seems unfair, but you know, how many pins did you use when you made the quilt? So now I'm going to line up the center, and I'm going to line up each end and pin so that everything is even. And then I'm going to put a few pins in between to hold it so that my bottom feed dogs don't move my fabric too far ahead. So let's go ahead and do that, and I'll be right back. Okay, I have the full length pinned all the way down, and my backing is nice and flat. Now I want to take a seam, and I do not want to include any of the selvage in the quilt back at all. So when we're done, we're going to cut this off. So the way that I do this is I put my 1/4 inch foot fence, or the edge if you're using one without a fence, right there beside or slightly inside of the selvage, because I don't want any selvage. And I'm going to sew down the length. Okay, so now that I've got that whole length sewn, I'm going to trim the back to 1/4 inch. And I do that by putting the 1/4 inch line on my ruler on the seam. And if you notice, I'm going to get rid of all of the selvage. Now the question I always get asked is why? Why get rid of the selvage? And the answer is that the selvage is woven tighter than the rest of the fabric so that you can attach it to pins where the fabric goes through to be printed. And you can actually see on this, if you look real close there, you can see the pin marks where it's attached to the machine. So you don't want any of that in your quilt, even in the backing, because when you wash your quilt, it's going to shrink differently than the rest of it. So we want to get rid of that. So we're going to cut down the whole length of the quilt, or of the backing, all the way from one end to the other to get rid of that. And then we're going to press. And if you notice, let me see if I can see this here. Notice how nice and even my ends are. Look at that. Your long armor needs you to be that even. And the reason why is because we have to square your back up on our frame. And if one side of your back is way longer than the other, it makes it impossible to square up without ripping it. So, or cutting it or squaring it up. And so this way it will be perfect when you get it. So let's go ahead and press, and I'll be right back. Alright, last step. Here you can see my perfect little 1/4 inch seam. And 1/4 inch is enough, by the way. It's enough for your front and enough for your back. And at this point, you're going to want to check with your long armor. Some long armors prefer if you press this open. I am actually fine if you just press it to the side. So check with your long armor. And figure out what way she likes it, and then press that flat. And that's it. It's not that hard, is it? Just need those math skills. Thank you for watching Cotton Candy Quilts.